Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Eliut Flores. I'm a professor at the College of Communication and Information at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. I teach a class, a graduate course on special topics on artificial intelligence. And when I designed this course, I realized that my intent was to bring a whole bunch of special speakers from all over the world. And it would have been terrible of me to keep that incredible accumulation of knowledge just for my students. So I kind of reinvented the course and made half of the class public by transforming it into open webinars for the audience at large. And every week we have had every 2 weeks, because one class is private and the other one is open to the public. And we have had about 50, 60 people. But today we have over 100. So we are very, very pleased. And we know that all of you are really going to enjoy this special webinar that we are conducting today on the case for open innovation in scaling artificial intelligence and data collaborations, democratizing artificial intelligence and emerging technologies for good. I know that's a mouthful, but it's all going to make sense to you in the next few minutes. We organized this webinar today with the incredible collaboration of Lorena Molina Irizarry. She's a Puerto Rican who works in Washington in the US Census Bureau, and she's going to be giving you much more details about all the different speakers. I don't want to shortchange anyone, so I will allow her to do that. In terms of dynamics of the meeting, I hope that all of you register and receive an invitation so that the chat is visible to you and you can write in the chat any questions or comments as our speakers go forward making their remarks. At some point, we will open the session for open Q&A. So if you do not have access to the chat, or if you prefer to speak instead of write, then you can raise your hand electronically and we'll then give you the permission so that you can open your own mic and address the group. So let's get started because we want to make the most of these couple hours. And without further ado, Lorena, please take over.
Gracias, Professor. My name is Lorena Molina Irizarry, as Eliut mentioned. Good evening y buenas noches a todos. I currently serve as Senior Advisor for Puerto Rico and Data Equity at the U.S. Census Bureau. I've been there for a while. Also helped co-found our Innovation Hub, which is the Census Open Innovation Labs, and currently working on data equity, but specifically focusing on Puerto Rico. And part of this effort is to really bring the knowledge and the know-how of not only the federal agencies, but also industry players and partners from across the nation to support in this effort and really anchor on this topic around AI and data and how it all comes together. So thank you to Professor Eliut Torres in the College of Communication and Information. Sorry, Flores. I actually read that completely wrong. Flores, which we have been collaborating for a while, so apologize for the misspell of the last name. And all the speakers that are joining here today. Again, this is a part of a broader series, but we wanted to focus on all things data and AI. So joining us as well to co-moderate with Eliut and myself is Pedro Cruz, who's the Director of Web3 Development and Innovation in the Puerto Rico Blockchain Trade Association and has been a longstanding collaborator with us and some of our programs like the Opportunity Project and some of the efforts that they're doing on the ground. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. We recently signed the U.S. Census Bureau. We recently signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with the University of Puerto Rico. So I hope this is one of many, many more engagements to come and create the space for engagement and collaboration. So tonight, we have a distinguished set of guests and panelists that will be presenting in a short format, lightning talks, and then we'll all join in conversation in a fireside chat towards the end, which is really a panel, but very conversational and informal. And we hope that you all participate and ask questions. So again, we're anchored in this collective theme of open innovations for scaling AI and data collaborations and democratizing AI and emerging technologies for good. So with that, I want to turn it over to my co-moderator, Pedro, to introduce the first speaker, and then I'll just run through some of the other speakers joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Lorena, and hi, everyone. So without further ado, it's an honor to introduce the speakers today. So our first speaker is going to be Silona Bonewald, founder of Leading Bit Solutions, Foundation for Open Source Ecosystem Technology and Citable AI. So welcome, Silona.
Yes, we also have today Luke Keller, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at the Census Bureau. We also have Christian Moscardi, who's the Director of Data Science and AI in Technology, AI and Technology as in the Census Bureau as well.
Definitely, yeah. So we have Adrián Alos Perez, Chief Technology Officer and Economist at Abexus. Edgar Cruz, MBA student at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. He's an engineering professional, co-founder and director of Evolving Space.
And finally, we have Daimon Nwankwo, who's an Emerging Technology Fellow at Census XD, which is our Emerging Technology and AI Hub at the Bureau. She's also a Senior Data Engineer, Industrial Engineer, Data Analytics Instructor, and an author. So thank you again for all of you to join in this panel, and we hope to have a really amazing conversation. Before we begin, I would like to inform you that, again, the format is short, lightning talk format for about 60 to 70 minutes. Then we'll go into a 30-minute discussion and fireside chat, like a panel where all the speakers will join, and then we'll conclude with a 20-minute or so open Q&A to interact with all the participants and attendees. As the speakers present, I like everybody in the audience to write down any questions, comments, insights, or thoughts that you're learning throughout the lightning talks so that you can post them on the chat during the panel Q&A session at the end so we can address them later.
Yeah, so we have so many people. Make sure to put down your questions. Let us know in the chat. And at this moment, I would like to introduce Silona, who will kick us off with our first lightning talk. So I'll pass it to her.
Thank you. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to give a quick talk about ethical AI. And when talking about ethical AI, I think first of all, we have to discuss like, what is AI? And there's 4 defined types right now that are out, which is the reactive machines, limited memory, theory of mind, self-awareness, yada, yada, yada. But I think one of the things that people don't realize at this point, we're still actually in reactive machines. I know they're calling it generative AI and things of that nature, but really ChatGPT is an evolution of autocomplete on search. And what's happened now is there are the other different types of AI being worked on, and Huggable Face shows a lot of those different ones. They're using the weighted models from those LLMs, but they're not actually, there is no self-awareness, there is no theory of mind, there might be some memory, but there actually isn't, which is like what's causing some of the problems there. And so I just wanted to like bring that up and bring up the fact that there's a lot of other kinds of AI than what we're just talking about right now in the public sphere. You know, everyone's all talking about ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and things of that nature, and they're a very specific type of model in regards to it. So, but the main point of this is, what do we mean by ethical? And of course, with that, we have the whole definition of moral, and like, God, people go and get PhDs on this and, you know, things of that nature. So it becomes a very difficult thing for us to often define. But I'm just going to go with like the basic dictionary version of it, which means truthful, fair, and honest. And so when we're talking about it, I also want to talk about, when do we mean ethical? Because so often in AI, I'm watching ethical being slapped onto the end in regards to, oh, don't show those gross pictures, or don't reveal this data, or don't do this, or don't do that, or things of that nature. And instead, I say that we need to be thinking ethically every step of the way in regards to ethical AI. We need to talk about it in design. We need to talk about it in research. We talk about it in data collection and manipulation. We need to talk about implementation. We need to talk about training and monitoring, testing and feedback, evaluation and iteration. If we're not talking about looking at the ethical aspects of that all the way through, we're going to run into a lot of problems. So for me, one of the things that I always think of in regards to the whole concept of truthful, fair, and honest is I kind of default to this because y'all will find out I have an extreme bias towards open source and the open methodologies in regards to that. But it needs to be open, not just transparent. What's happening right now with a lot of the AI models is they're going, hey, here's the code. But when the data is the code, if I don't know what the data is, I still don't know it, but I can't always see the data because there's privacy issues, there's ownership issues, there's all these other different reasons in regards to it. So we have to be careful with that. And then the thing that made the whole generative AI stuff explode was Facebook releasing the Llama models, which gave the weighting systems, which then allowed people to then reuse that. Because the reality of it is creating those models and training them at the very beginning is very, very difficult for normal people to ever be able to do because they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on it. So you have to like look at that from those aspects. And then of course there's the whole aspect of privacy. And privacy comes into play more on more of those levels than you would think it would. Because yes, it comes into play on the data gathering, which of course the majority of those models didn't do at the beginning. It comes in regards to the storage. It comes in regards to reverse engineering. It comes in regards to inferences that lead to types of manipulation. And it comes into place in regards to assumptions being made. So I think a lot of times, to be fair, you need to consider things like individual agency, not just the corporations right now that are gathering all this data and battling each other out in regards to ownership. We should be taking it back to the individual and realizing what's happening there, and look at that in regards to the usage and the citations that are happening in regards to that. Sorry, the usage, and bring in citations in regards to that. So that way, a lot of people shared stuff on the internet, and they did it on purpose to try to get more business or credit or things of that nature. But then when you take that away, you've taken away their agency. And then of course, there's also just direct misuse that happens. So fair, how do we define fair? You know, I just brought up the whole aspect of ownership, where right now corporations are battling for ownership of our data. And we're watching right now where different groups are basically battling over terms and conditions, for example. Those are all evolving right now, where all these different groups are now going, oh no, now I can actually use any data that you give me on training our AI models. You know, Zoom did it and they had to like roll stuff back because they were doing it in regards to, they wanted to train their transcription, but they also wanted it for, they were also taking images and video. And it was just like, so basically if you go through and you know, mine a video conferencing tool, you know, you get my voice, you get my appearance, you get all these different things in regards to being able to replicate it as me, and that's not fair. And so it's not okay. And for that, we need to go back and kind of look at, there is pre-existing law on this, and there are licenses, and there are different groups that try to address that. And I think it's really interesting that in the majority of the open source sphere, the biggest thing is citation. The really big thing is giving people credit in regards to the work that you're using and how you're doing it and what you're doing with it. And then of course, we've got a lot of law that's come into play in regards to that too, and on regards to copyright and trademarks, saying, hey, you know, this is mine, you didn't ask to be able to go in there and do this, and it's a problem. And there's been some big dogs that have been entering that arena lately too, because there's like unions of like artists and writers and things of that nature. But then there's also like really large libraries that got mined and things, and other businesses that got mined that aren't exactly happy with it. And on the citations thing, I think it's important for the ownership, but it's also important in regards to accountability and your ability to trust but verify. And it facilitates more in regards to those open collaborations, which really feeds in, I think, into that honesty portion of the ethical nature. And then on the truthful part, we really have to talk about biases. Um, I like to joke a lot about ChatGPT sounding like a 25-year-old white male intern because it's the data that it got trained off of, right? It got trained off of this data. It goes around it and it acts that way. And it's definitely not suffering from Dunner-Kruger syndrome in regards to less confidence. It's got a lot of confidence. And so people believe it. And they sit there and they go like, oh, yes, this is great. But there's a lot of things that are accidentally put into these systems in regards to biases. And once again, those come in on multiple levels, right? There's the data itself, there's the training of the data, there's all these different aspects that you go into using it, but there's also the different learning models that you use in regards to it. Are you doing social intelligence with sentiment analysis, or are you doing things that are supervised versus unsupervised? And are you doing regression, and how are you doing those? And if you do transfer one weighted model to another, how are you going to counteract those inherent biases in regards to it? What are you going to do there? There's a lot to unpack in regards to it. And then, of course, the biggest part on some of this is I think we have a tragedy of discernment in society, in that people are having a very hard time telling what is true, and how to do that from a reasonable uh, manner. And so you're getting a lot of different things on that nature. And so I often I use ChatGPT 4 all the time. Okay, I've got a paid subscription, but I do often view it as being the next step of cold reading or astrology. In that it's going through looking for these really common things and these really common patterns and saying, yes, this is yours. And it says it so confidently that people believe it. And we have to be very, very careful with that. One of the earlier versions on ChatGPT 3, I had my mom visiting for Christmas, and I threw it up on the big screen and told her to ask it a question. And so she's one of the foremost researchers on osteocytes. And so she sat there and said, what's the difference between an osteocyte and an osteoblast? And it gave her this thing that sounded completely reasonable, but had 5 major things wrong with it. And she was like, no, this is horrible. I'll never, ever use it. So you have to be careful on the discernment, because if you do use it with discernment, and that's the part that I talked to my mom about, you can actually get really good stuff out of it. It's just that, you have to come at it, you have to be careful having an intern use it versus a subject matter expert. And that brings me into the next topic of, in regards to honesty, is manipulation. Um, how do we manipulate it ethically, and how do we make sure that it does not manipulate us? And I think that's another big question that people don't often, talk about. I see a lot of different stuff in regards to data governance, but I don't see as much in regards to the individual, and being careful about that, because the manipulation at this point can become personalized. And when that happens, it becomes, it's like, going back to my fortune teller, there's the fortune teller who just does the cold reading, who knows nothing about you and just looks at your appearance. And then there's the next level, right, that goes in, like, Google searches you and knows all this stuff and then comes in to influence you. That's what we're getting to. We're getting to where we're creating these automated fortune tellers that can personalize things and make that manipulation very visceral. So the question is, on some of this, how do you do non-discrimination? How do you make sure that you don't have that sort of thing? And to me, the biggest aspect of that is going to be diversity and inclusion. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to get the multiplicity of perspectives that you need to actually go through and make sure that you are getting your data correctly, that you're doing good reviews, that you have a way of incorporating feedback and evaluation. One of the biggest problems with some of these is their models are so big. They're like, oh yeah, no more data past the state. I'm like, well, that definitely means you don't have anything in regards to feedback and fixing things. And then also, I think impact measurement is going to come in really big here. It's just that I don't see a lot of that being developed yet. And for that, that's why we have to kind of go back to the whole peer review model, where we don't just peer review the code algorithms. We need to actually peer review the data gathering, in-depth analysis of the results, accuracy, looking for ethical constraints in the peer review process. All of those different pieces, I think, is going to be crucial to moving this forward. And then I think we're really going to have to educate people on it, as to what the AIs are doing and what is and isn't acceptable. And I think for that, we do really have to define risk and misuse and what that is. And to me, we have some of that in current legal structures. And there are some current overlaps that are happening right now. But we really all do need to go back and look at standardization and policy making, so that we can, if we don't create good standards, they're going to go ahead and make policies for us without talking to us about it first. And that ends up being very problematic. And I have a listing of a bunch of groups that are working towards that, but it's not by any means done. Like the White House just came out with a statement on, doing safe, secure, trustworthy use and development of AI, which was not bad, and I'm going to be doing some input on it. But like one of the things I saw that was lacking was the data gathering, and I think I'm here with a bunch of data nerds right now, so I think I'm pretty safe in saying that that needs more of a prioritization. And then beyond that, the next thing that I'd like to throw into the bonnet in regards to all the bees that I just put in there is we need to consider the other types of impact that are happening as well. So I'm looking very hard at the data and the software and things of that nature, but we're not always talking about how much energy does it use. What is the job impacts and what does the retraining look like for people to be able to use this? What are some of the economic impacts that are going to happen where people start locking down information because of the fact that they don't want to, be disenfranchised the way that they are currently? How does that all work together? And so going beyond just the technology itself and what the technology can directly do, and looking deeper on some of those different pieces. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Silona. I think that was a great starting point to kind of open up this conversation with the topics of bias, ethics, and how to really not think just about the governance piece and kind of the infrastructure piece of it, but really how is it affecting real people. So thank you for opening up with that. So next, I would love to introduce Luke Keller, who's our Chief Innovation Officer at the Census Bureau and also co-founder of the XD Lab. Luke?
Thanks so much, Lorena, for the introduction. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you may be. Again, my name is Luke Keller, Chief Innovation Officer of the Census Bureau. I manage an office called the Innovation Strategy Office here at the Census Bureau, and it's comprised of a few different teams, but there's a common thread across all of these teams, and that's what I think I'd like to spend the bulk of my time talking about when we talk about kind of making the case for open innovation, which is that each of the teams that sit in the Innovation Strategy Office are teams that have found really interesting and alternative ways to infusing alternative opinions into the way that the Census Bureau delivers its mission. So Lorena mentioned earlier, for example, that she's co-founder of the Census Open Innovation Labs. It's a really fascinating team that's filled with a tremendous amount of expertise, particularly in human-centered design. They found really exciting ways through projects like the Opportunity Project, which is this program from the Census Bureau that's essentially facilitating hackathons, if you will, with private sector partners in academia, et cetera, using open data to create new data products that promote opportunity and equity. As well as another really exciting program that was recently launched in the last 24 months, which is called Stat Ventures, which is a way for the Census Bureau to essentially award prize money to private sector partners. So whether those are individual companies, teams of individuals, academics, et cetera, it's a way for us to essentially partner with individuals outside the Census Bureau to explore, again, new and alternative ways to deliver on our mission. The reason, at least on the Census Open Innovation Labs front, the reason I think their work is so exciting when you think about the potential of AI is that, when we think about where innovation is happening, where the bulk of AI work, the kind of disruption is happening, it's outside the U.S. government. We do have entities like DARPA, right, where sort of completely disruptive technologies, right, like GPS have been formed and funded, if you will, and made publicly available and have radically transformed the way that we essentially live our lives every day. But what we're seeing now, I think that's really fascinating, is that the bulk of the disruption is coming out of the private sector and it's coming out of academia. And so I think the question we really need to be asking ourselves at this point is, how do we tap into that expertise and how do we do so responsibly? And I think that really speaks to Silona's point earlier. So one of the other teams that sits in my area, which you'll hear from Diamond in a little bit, she's currently a member of that team. It's called XD, and they're our emerging technologies group. And they're looking at a lot of different technologies, not just artificial intelligence. They're looking at other emerging technologies like privacy enhancing technologies, which are a set of technologies like deferential privacy, secure multi-party computing, et cetera, that are really thinking about the data problem that Silona had mentioned. So, you can't really, there's only so much, artificial intelligence, big data machine learning projects you can do, machine learning projects that you can do without a lot of data. These systems really depend on data to learn and grow and add value. Where does that data come from? It's a huge challenge in the US government, and especially for statistical agencies. And so we need to come up, simultaneously, while we think about issues of ethics, responsibility, promoting equity, et cetera, with AI, we also need to think about where that data comes from. Actually, in Christian, who you'll hear from later today, I'm sure, his team has access to petabytes of data, if you will. So he can speak a little bit more to that in a little bit. But I want to make the case for a moment about why I actually think the US government is really well positioned, and the Census Bureau especially, for guiding this conversation at the very least, or playing a small part in scaling AI and data collaborations with the private sector. So Silona had mentioned that there was an executive order that was just announced this week, which is EO 14110, and it's complementary to a previous executive order, 13960, which both really are designed to promote the use of responsible AI, both in the private sector as well as in the US government. And the reason this is really important is that this space, as I mentioned earlier, is rapidly developing. And with the advent, for example, of Chat GPT, the public is quickly gaining access to these tools. They're being confronted with these tools every day. News articles that they read when they wake up every morning on MSN, if you will, for example, are being generated entirely by artificial intelligence solutions. And it's really important, I think, at this moment for us to kind of take a step back and just understand how will these tools change our society, and what can we do to kind of guide them in a way that they're being developed responsibly and with the interest of our people front and center, right? And so this is where I think the US government is actually really well positioned, and the Census Bureau especially. So we recently at the Census Bureau launched an AI machine learning governance working group. And the goal of that working group is really to understand, we have this kind of rapidly increasing kind of complex landscape that's made up of a lot of different policies, executive orders, risk management frameworks, et cetera, that are again just being released almost as quickly as the kind of disruptive technologies that we're seeing from private sector and academia. But how do we make sense of all of this? And how does that relate really to the long and storied history that the Census Bureau has about maintaining a high statistical quality standard? And is there anything we need to do to kind of fundamentally change our practice? And so I'm really excited about this working group, which was launched 2 months ago, because it's going to, I think for the Census Bureau at least, it's going to identify gaps in our current thinking. And the goal of that working group is actually to produce an AI strategy for the Census Bureau. And that strategy is meant to be really an articulation of, where are the areas that we currently have investment in various emerging technologies? Where are the areas that we're missing that investment of time and energy and focus? Where are we missing sort of policies, guidance, et cetera, to help guide the responsible adoption of these technologies? And ultimately, how can we make them an asset to our people? Not something necessarily to replace people, but rather to make our jobs easier. For anybody that's worked in the U.S. government, it's pretty hard, and it's it's for the same reasons why it can't be necessarily maneuvered quickly, are the reasons why it also, when all the kind of planets align and, we're really excited about something, it still takes a while to do it, which is that, there are appropriate safeguards, if you will, from moving extremely quickly. But that, I think, in a way, is kind of helping to guide this conversation about the responsible adoption of a lot of these new technologies and solutions. And so all this to say, I guess to kind of scale it back to open innovation, where does open innovation come in, right? I think what's really exciting about, going back to some of the teams that are in my area and how they kind of plug into this AI machine learning governance conversation, what's really exciting, I think, about the Census Bureau's approach to this problem is that we don't do any of this in a vacuum. Like the Census Bureau has like an untold amount of partnerships, if you will, with academia, private sector companies, et cetera, in a number of ways. So some of those include cooperative agreements with various universities. Lorena mentioned earlier on this call that we have a MOU, which has brought us here today, right? These are the kinds of conversations that the Census Bureau has begun, continuing to enter, if you will, as a way to kind of infuse outside expertise into the ways that we work. But we've also taken some other approaches too. So I mentioned earlier the Opportunity Project, which is, again, an opportunity for folks outside of the Census Bureau to contribute their expertise in a hackathon-style format to develop new products that promote equity and opportunity. This is, of course, like one of the best ways, I think, for folks outside the U.S. government to get involved with the Census Bureau's activities, as well as to leverage other agencies' federal data. And as the sort of advent or the continued development of various AI and emerging technologies grows, if you will, it just introduces new opportunities to lean into the top program and the infrastructure that they've created to plug into helping the Census Bureau deliver its mission and really provide the best data possible about our people and our economy. I mentioned Stat Ventures earlier. Again, when we think about open innovation, it really is a way to take a step back and invite other partners that have never worked with the Census Bureau before to come in and incentivize that partnership through prize awards, if you will. They award in a phase-based model. It really is a way for us, these two programs represent a really interesting way for the Census Bureau to kind of do a gut check on the way that we're thinking about these technologies and the way that we're thinking about maximizing their impact in the delivery of our mission. And it's a really useful way to bring in, again, those alternative viewpoints. And then the last program I'll mention, which, again, you'll hear from Diamond later today, and this is the program that she comes from, is the Emerging Technology Fellowship at the Census Bureau. So this is a program that is run by the XD team, and it's a really interesting kind of approach to open innovation, because when you think about open innovation, traditionally it's just outside partners, kind of providing that feedback, if you will. But what's really exciting about that, that program's model is that it's a term-based fellowship. So it's a really interesting kind of deep infusion of private sector expertise into a lot of different and fascinating subject areas that the Census Bureau is currently addressing. So some of their projects include a bias toolkit, which you can find at bias.xd.gov, which is a way, basically a home for the Census Bureau to really produce tools that help address bias in federal data and algorithms. They recently launched a model card generator in a web-based format. So they traditionally had a Python script for this. It's very similar to model card generators you can find on places like Hugging Face, but the core differentiator here, and the thing I'm most excited about, is that now that we have all these new executive orders kind of helping to guide the development of machine learning models in the U.S. government, can the existing market of model card generators really adapt to the needs of the regulatory environment of the U.S. government? Probably not, because it's very specific and unique. And so what this team is now doing in their next phase of research, for example, is looking at what are the unique constraints of developing models in the U.S. government? What are the kind of unique parameters, metadata, et cetera, that these models need to be thinking about, including in their documentation, so that when we're responding to data calls to OMB, or more importantly, when we're sharing those models with others in the U.S. government to promote knowledge sharing, that they have all the information they need to most understand not just the implications of the model itself from a functional perspective, but also how they relate to the regulatory environment and how they help us navigate that. Some other projects or project areas include that team's focus on privacy enhancing technologies, which I mentioned earlier, which is really about a way for us to plug into the activities of data owners that sit completely outside the Census Bureau, and a way for us to essentially compute on data that we currently don't have in-house and never would need to. And the really exciting thing about that, of course, is that when you think about data sharing agreements, and back to Silona's original problem about where the data comes from, that's one of the major blockers, right? The regulatory and legal environment, as well as the incentives, right? Like a lot of data owners have tremendously sensitive data. They don't necessarily want to share it in its raw format with the Census Bureau or anyone, really. But privacy enhancing technologies, when you think about the input and output privacy functions that they present, create an opportunity for us to learn really interesting insights from that data without ever disclosing the identity of individuals contained therein. So those are just a few examples of the kinds of work that team's focused on. And again, Diamond will speak a little bit more to her specific sort of experience working on that team for the last few months so far. Give you a very honest opinion of that, if you will, I hope. But it's something that we're really excited about. And so I'll just drop a few quick kind of calls to action here to selfishly promote some of these teams. Stat Ventures currently is currently accepting applications for phase 2 prize awards, if you will. So if you're an outside entity that's looking to get involved with the Census Bureau's sort of mission delivery, specifically on supply chain data, they are now accepting applications for that. So you can go to the Stat Ventures website, which I will drop in the chat. We're also hosting a innovation summit, which has been hosted for several years now by the Census Open Innovation Labs. If you want the latest updates on that, you can go to COIL's website at coil.census.gov. Thank you, Lorena, for dropping the link. And you can sign up for email updates there. And then the last selfish promotion I will make is that the XD team is currently recruiting for emerging technology fellowships. It's an entirely remote position, so anybody who is a US citizen is eligible to apply. We encourage you to go to xd.gov/apply if you have emerging technology expertise or technical project management expertise, because we would love to have you on board. So thank you very much. Appreciate y'all listening tonight.
Thank you so much, Luke. And I know we'll hear a lot about Diamond later. She's the last speaker for the evening. But with that, and I think a great segue into continuing the conversation, I want to introduce Christian Moscardi, who's a director of data science and technology within the business development staff at the Census Bureau. He actually also came into the Census Bureau through one of these innovation programs. So perhaps, Christian, you can talk about that experience, and later on, Edgar is going to talk a little bit about the skill set gap that exists right now in this kind of sphere on data, AI, data science in general, and the intersection of technology. We talk about technology in a vacuum oftentimes without talking about data. So there's a really keen skill gap, especially that we see in Puerto Rico as well. So Christian, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lorena. Yeah, and thanks to both Luke and Silona for really interesting talks so far, both thought-provoking. Yeah, I will sort of pick up where Luke left off and keep rolling with those themes about some of the work we're doing at the Census Bureau. But yeah, a little bit about me and those innovation fellowships and kind of my experience to start. So I joined the Census Bureau in 2018 through a fellowship program called the Civic Digital Fellowship that brings in typically like earlier career folks coming out of either undergrad or grad school to work on shorter term projects that essentially are attempting to explore these emerging technologies, AI, other newer ways of government to operate, really improving the way that government is delivering services to the American people, right? Thanks, Lorena. Prior to that, I had been in the private sector, in the startup world, doing data science and that sort of thing. And essentially, realized that I had this, interesting technical skill set and was making money from it, to be frank, right, in the private sector, but was sort of missing a certain feeling of impact that I suspected I might be able to get working more closely in government, right? And in addition, really had a curiosity about the relationship between, government and these emerging technologies, right? How does government adopt them? How does government use them? How does government think about them? And, in addition to that, really an interest in kind of like being on the ground, right? Like, how do we use these emerging technologies so that the government can like take out the trash better, right? Or do these really, do really the core things that you want your government to be doing for you, right? Delivering some of these really basic services. So that curiosity and interest has led me into the position that I'm in now. Leading a team of data scientists and software engineers at the Bureau. We're not in Luke's area, actually, the business development staff. We're sort of much more embedded, sitting much more close. We're sitting much closer to production areas at the Bureau that are actually delivering, data products on a monthly, quarterly, annual, what have you, basis. And we work with those teams to think about really the nitty gritty of what do you need to do in order to adopt whatever emerging technology, technique, data science method, that you could think of, right? That's kind of our specialty. So, back in 2000, this work grew out of my Civic Digital Fellowship project. I think in 2019, we developed and implemented the first production usage of AI machine learning at Census, some really straightforward text classification stuff. But there'd been quite a bit of research at the Bureau previously. We were the first to go to production, and that process was really fascinating and eye-opening. Happy to talk a bit more about that later if there's interest. Currently, our team is working on a portfolio of projects to improve the way that the Bureau is collecting and publishing data about the supply chain. And actually, I was going to talk a little bit about the Stat Ventures effort as well. I'm sort of sitting on the other side of that within Census, where because we're looking to do everything we can to move the needle on the quality, and timeliness and granularity of supply chain data that the Bureau is publishing. Obviously, this is of great national, supply information about the supply chain is of great national interest right now, given the president's priorities and then the recent supply chain crises that have happened that we're all aware of. So we are collaborating with Luke's team COIL and that group to put on this public-facing challenge specifically around supply chain data. So Luke's already plugged it, but I'll plug it again. I think submissions are open for another week. If you do have ideas about how Census could better collect, publish, produce data about the supply chain in ways that get us closer to real time, get us closer to the storefront or to the warehouse, or to very granular levels of detail. Anything like that we're really looking for. So I was just going to spend the next couple minutes talking a little more specifically. Luke kind of gave you the overall strokes of what Stat Ventures look like. But some of the kind of cool ideas that are percolating through this Stat Ventures challenge and the supply chain work in particular. So right now, the way the Bureau collects and publishes data generally is surveys, right? We send a survey out, and when it comes to supply chain, we're sending a survey out to a business typically, right? And we're saying, hey, tell us about your revenues. Maybe we're saying, tell us about your inventories. What kind of products are you selling and shipping? Questions like that, right? And it's almost all through survey-based data collection. So with surveys, we have this big challenge and sort of trade-off between timeliness and granularity, because you can either essentially ask businesses a couple of very high level questions, maybe once a quarter, and produce sort of high level quarterly indicators of economic supply chain related activity, or every 5 years or so, you can send a much more detailed questionnaire where you ask about, specific products or specific inputs or things like that you might care about. But we can't do that on a quarterly basis to businesses across the country. It would be way too burdensome. It would be way too time consuming. So what we're thinking about with the Stat Ventures Challenge is how we can kind of break through that trade-off where we're either granular but not timely, or timely but not granular, right? So, and we know this technology is out there, right? Buzzwords for data collection, sensors, digital twins, Internet of Things, passive data collection, right? I certainly, from my background in the private sector, am familiar with all this work going on, and it's really, really cool, right? Satellite imagery as well. All these different new mechanisms for collecting data have huge potential applications for the supply chain, right? If you think about satellite imagery, you might be able to use that to see, truck border crossings, how many trucks are crossing the border on a daily basis, what is port activity looking like, how many containers are stacked up in any given port, right? All kinds of really interesting and useful questions that you might want to know, thinking about ensuring the ultimately ensuring the availability of goods for Americans, right, is what we really care about with the supply chain. But the thing about all these mechanisms for collecting data is that they produce huge volumes, right? And sort of tying back into the AI theme of this, you ultimately need automated processes, and especially like a lot of AI image recognition, things like that, maybe text classification, text recognition, to be able to actually handle these data at scale and produce useful numbers that decision makers can take and actually do something with in terms of interventions that might help improve some issue or solve some crisis related to the supply chain. So that's what we're really excited to see come in through the Stat Ventures Challenge right now, right? Is solutions that can both offer those volumes of data and then help us process them at the same time. To Luke's point about the sort of stores of data the Bureau already has, I think we are starting from a really good place at Census, where we have really strong safeguards around confidentiality, around privacy, around data access and logging that data access, ensuring that only the right people are accessing the right data at the right time. We anonymize through something called protected information keys, PICs, any individual data that researchers are using. So even if you are accessing within Census, protected microdata, you're only looking at anonymized information. So I think we're already in a good place with this data management. There's certainly more and better work we can do, but we're really looking forward to bringing in these new streams of data, these new methods, these new techniques to add to that arsenal, and figure out how to make more useful information for the American public. So stepping back and to some extent rehashing what Luke said, some of the benefits that I'm seeing here with this Stat Ventures collaboration are, bringing in emerging technology ideas and people that might not otherwise be visible to government or might not otherwise participate in a traditional government acquisitions process, right? We don't just have the usual suspects of contracting companies, Booz, Deloitte, et cetera, right? We have a really interesting group of innovative individuals from, the private sector, from academia, from nonprofits and NGOs, all coming together into sort of a cohort-based model. It's also enabling closer collaboration versus the traditional acquisitions process that you might see in government, where we're able to present some of the constraints and concerns we have at the Bureau, right? Like, we're an agency full of statisticians. We've been worrying about bias since well before bias was like a buzzword associated with AI, right? Like, really worried about bias. So, we're able to bring up some of those constraints, concerns. We have we also have very involved disclosure avoidance processes, right? Ensuring that anything we publish is not able to be used to identify some individual or something like that in the data. So being able to just share those constraints and some of those things we have with folks we're partnering with in Stat Ventures has been really cool, and something that you're not necessarily able to do in a more traditional acquisitions process. So that sort of angle on open innovation and collaboration has been really awesome. And then, ultimately just rethinking the way we collect and publish supply chain data, and even starting these conversations within Census, right? Kind of deep in the agency where I'm sitting, where we've been doing surveys for, for forever, literally hundreds of years, right? The decennial census started in the like 1800s or something, like late 1700s. So we've been doing surveys for a very, very long time at Census, and I think it's awesome to just see, sort of in a culture change kind of way, internally, people getting excited about this stuff and thinking about how to use it, while also bringing some of that statistical rigor to the discussion. So I'll stop there and say thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christian. That was very insightful for me. I had no idea of the scale of all the data that can be available. For me, I'm a developer, and I think it's very important that we train developers and everyone to look for that data and use it in their organizations, in their AI models. So thank you so much for sharing. Next up, we have Adrian. So Adrian, how about you unmute your mic and go ahead and start with your talk.
Sure. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Adrian Alos. I am the Chief Technology Officer and an economist with Abexis Analytics. We were one of the first data analytics firms founded in Puerto Rico just over, almost 4 years ago. I was, as I mentioned, I was trained as an economist, studied here in Puerto Rico and in Canada. I've been working in the local industry for over 10 years. And about 4 years ago, we decided to launch this company. About me and 2 other crazy guys, and decided to jump into this world of data science, machine learning models, and we quickly ran up to one of the first challenges, the biggest challenges that Puerto Rico has, and it's the availability of data. Oftentimes, I hear these chats with the guys from the census, and I have to say, I mean, if it wasn't for census data or Bureau of Labor Statistics data, Puerto Rico would essentially be closer to a data desert in many sectors, and that has obviously impeded the growth of local companies, local innovators that want to build AI or machine learning models. So at that point, we decided to take a step back, see where Puerto Rico was at that point, and start engaging with private and public firms to see how they can start by first generating data, right, acquiring data, structuring it, and publishing it. Now, most of the times, I would say that most of the private companies in Puerto Rico, you can sort of group them in 2 different areas: those that essentially have very little interest in data, and those that would just start accumulating it without any type of structuring or any idea of how they were going to use them, and would essentially have silos that you couldn't do much with them. Right? You essentially had to start from zero, start organizing that data for them, and then developing how they were going to acquire more data in the future. So the very first models that we started building in-house were labeling models, right? Models to help classify that data and help present these private entities, and in some cases public agencies and departments, so that I could see exactly what they had and what they could start to do with it, and how they could start right, providing the tools and the information so that locals and anybody who wanted to invest or start a business in Puerto Rico could actually use that information, right, to start building. And that's sort of when we then hit the second gap, or the second big problem in Puerto Rico, and that was with the skills gap, essentially. A lack of data analysts and data scientists, and it was we had a lot of discussions of, this is sort of like a chicken and egg scenario. Are we going to start helping these agencies develop this data and publish it, and that's going to bring in more data analysts and more data scientists, or are we going to have to say you have to start hiring data scientists and data analysts, and then they're going to help publish and generate all this data? So this is sort of the point where Puerto Rico is right now, where it's starting to develop the tools to be able to produce the data that they need. There are some agencies that are a little bit ahead. There's still some areas where you could sort of see those are the areas where developments could start from the Department of the Treasury, Hacienda. CRIM in particular has developed several platforms to manage their data, to publish it, right, to make it readily available, even make it available to municipalities to aid them in identifying areas that are paying taxes, that aren't paying taxes, areas that could be developed. So it helps them identify potential. So there are certain agencies that are significantly ahead in terms of the potential that they have. There are others that are still, I would say, even 2-3 steps further behind. but essentially that's where we see the local market right now, and Puerto Rico is sort of an inflection point. Usually we have this very bad luck of getting into markets just a little bit too late, getting into economic sectors just a week or two after we should have, essentially. And Puerto Rico really needs to step up both in private and public sectors in the way we view data and the way we value it, and how we can determine the potential for what we're going to do with it. In that sense, as I mentioned, we've started to fill the gap, and I mean, when I say we, the entire local community, not just our company, but in terms of publishing data, making it publicly available. And now we're starting to get to that second stage where it's Puerto Rico needs more analysts, more data scientists to be able to aid both private and public entities in using this data, interpreting it, and then developing public policy with it. So that's where we're at.
All right, so thank you so much, Adrian. Next up, we have Edgar from Evolving Space.
Hi, everybody. My name is Edgar Cruz. I'm BA grad at UPRM and co-founder of Evolving Space. I often wondered, what am I doing on this panel? I'm not that software development oriented. I'm a mechanical engineer. My introduction to data was more like in kinematics and stress forces and simulations regarding heat transfer and all that stuff. And now I happen to be working a lot more with demographics and surveys and economic indicators. And it's been an interesting transition. Right now I'm working at the Business Development Center at the UPRM, working a lot with MPOs and small businesses. And since I graduated in 2019 and worked a little while in the industry in aerospace and medical devices specifically. And I started noticing these technology trends, right? And Puerto Rico seemed to be lagging behind and other spaces in Earth, and different countries were advancing in blockchain technology specifically, where I saw like the most gain, right? Because of the markets and stuff. I started looking into what was going to happen, how those technologies could specifically apply to engineering industries like manufacturing and supply chain, IoT, and all that stuff. And I decided to take upon a project, a personal project with a partner of mine, since we've been working on a couple of software projects related to the university and research ventures and stuff. And we decided to found this organization, Evolving Space. We did 2 Web3 hackathons in collaboration with Pedro, Cruz here, a big supporter. And we noticed this interesting dynamic where students would be able to apply their skills and knowledge and develop them, right, with the right mentoring and support from industry representatives and student mentors, and from the academia particularly. And then we collaborated with the census, and I discovered that they had the Opportunity Project, which is a framework that I appreciate a lot, and particularly focus on the Puerto Rico challenges. The second hackathon tackled those challenges, and that's something that I would like to keep promoting across the academic sector. So we basically want to bridge the gap between what's happening in the academia, which as we've mentioned, is kind of there's a disparate from what's happening on the industry. And since that's going to take some time to integrate into the curriculums and stuff, so we're trying to facilitate this education in whatever way is possible through all the collaborations. And many thanks to Lorena for facilitating these connections and inviting me to this panel. So after noticing this emerging technology renaissance, we started this grassroots movement. We're in talks with a couple of universities. We're creating communities, particularly focused on Web3, but since Web3, we see Web3 as a foundation for all other and for many industries, not to say all. And the integration with AI is going to make significant advances in Puerto Rico as a country, and present tons of opportunities for professionals and particularly on the government side as well. So that's something that we're supporting through our relationships. It's fair to say recently a university unblocked ChatGPT because we gave one of our courses, one of our workshops over there, and the students were very, very appreciative. The faculty, they were the ones who requested that tool should be used in the regular day-to-day, because if not, we're going to keep lagging behind, and it's something that we want to avoid. So yeah, as emerging entrepreneur and supporter in small business development, I think the challenges in data is in making it accessible to people is basically facilitating the interface, which is something that I want to congratulate the census that they're doing. They're facilitating how this information is interpreted, right, by non-familiar users. I see similar efforts from the Institute of Statistics of Puerto Rico, and the government is kind of doing some efforts as well, and that's something that I want to keep seeing. And at Evolving Space, like I said, we're creating different communities across different universities. If you're interested, please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation, see what type of projects we would like to have going. We have a team of engineers that would love to support whatever project, be it in finance, be it in agriculture technology, be it in the creative economy. I see a lot of potential in Puerto Rico, and in the conversation that I'm participating, I really see it happening. So I appreciate a lot having the opportunity to speak here and being part of this wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Edgar. And later on in the fireside chat, we definitely want to delve with you and Pedro actually on the skill gaps that exist in Puerto Rico right now, and how you're addressing that through building these collaborations with universities, with campuses, with your efforts around hackathons and others that really kind of put the technology in the hands of not only the youth, but just the community at large, and understand that this is something that can work to better the outcomes of communities and not the other way around. So with that, our last speaker, very excited to introduce Diamond Nuanco. She's an emerging technology fellow at XD, which is the shop that Luke leads at the Census Bureau. So Diamond, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Diamond Nuanco. Super excited to be here with you guys. So I'm going to talk through how I ended up as an XD fellow, and like why my path and how data engineering is very integral to everything that's coming forth when you look at technology. So much like Edgar, I started off as a traditional engineer. I worked in aerospace manufacturing as well, and spent a bulk of time as an industrial engineer there. And majority of my projects always had a data point to it. It was always data centric, whether I was looking at downtime, how to improve these metrics, how to create SharePoint dashboards to like bring these visualizations to life so we can understand our opportunities of improvement. And much like the issues that I'm continuing to see today, it was like the data is just off. Something is not right. And that thought kind of led me to pivoting into becoming a data engineer, where I was able to focus on how are we aggregating these data? How is it coming to us? What do we do to it? Like, how is it being stored? How do we check it and validate all the different stages within this data pipeline to ensure that we're going to get the most accurate and concise output? And I'm still seeing that now as a fellow that is in the census right now with XD. My project that I'm focusing on right now is much like a lot of businesses, public and private right now, pivoting to the cloud. And adopting open source technology. And that's huge wherever you go. And again, it all starts with the data and making sure that we have a solid foundation. So when we have our users looking at our data products and making sure that their grants and their funding and the things that they're using these statistics for are we presenting them in the most accurate, in the most timely and resourceful way? So that's ultimately where I stand, and that's my path, is just like focusing on the foundation of it. Without data engineering, there is no open innovation. Everything starts with that. And as catchy as AI and ML and all these tools are, without having a solid foundation focused on data quality, you'll continue to have chat GPT issues where it hallucinates data points and hallucinates points that don't exist because the data is not clean, it's not representative of what's actually going on. So data engineering may not sound as glamorous as the other roles, but it's really the backbone to everything that goes forward, whether it's data science, data analytics, or analytics engineer. It's really the conglomerate of understanding where your raw data is, how to store it, how to process it, and how to make sure that your end user can gain the insights that's needed from that information. And that's my talk. I appreciate y'all time and data engineering.
Thank you so much, Diamond. And I think next, I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the audience, and you're eager to join in. We have a few just notes and insights that Pedro and I have been taking throughout the course of the lightning talks. So we want to invite all of the speakers together to join in a fireside chat for about 25 minutes. And then we're open it up for questions. And if you have questions right now in the audience, feel free to drop them on the chat. So between Eliut, Pedro, myself, we can moderate the conversation and really be informal. I would just like to start the fireside chat with the speakers having reactions to each other. So I know you all come at this topic from different angles. Of course, from the Census Bureau side, we're all about the data and understanding the interplay and connections with how do we adopt new technologies in a very strict and bureaucratic environment like it is the federal government, but also how we can better work with external stakeholders and third party like industry, companies, startups, and many other technologies to help kind of balance that out. That was a key theme throughout. But Silona, I know you work all over the world and you work with other countries, and would love to hear from you also. How do you see this playing out in other environments? So anyway, I just want to kind of open up for initial reactions from the speakers to each other, and then we can go into more detailed questions.
Well, first of all, Diamond, you and I are going to become good friends.
I love it. I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
You were singing my song.
Like, honestly, it's so interesting because from Lean Six Sigma to now, it's still about, as you said, garbage in is garbage out. Like, no matter which way you swing it, you have to make sure that the root, your source data, is actually representative of what's going on. Because anything past that is just cascading the failures. So yeah, we're one of the same thing.
Actually, if I could interject, because I have a reaction to both of your presentations that I would like you to address it, because it has to do with the ethics and also with the data engineering. I'm really concerned about the risk of this book ideological banning ideology that has taken hold in public libraries, school libraries, and right now it's basically holding there. But I'm very concerned about that movement start moving upwards and cutting out progressive, liberal, LGBTQ perspectives in the data from training data sets and from that information and perspectives being available to answer questions asked by the public. How do you share my concern about that? Is there anything we can do? Because my biggest concern now is that now all this prejudice and all this censorship is being enforced by a number of state actors, even within the US.
Diamond, did you want to go first on that?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So most definitely. So I kind of, this is going to be one of those Silona I told you so moments. I did a presentation about this in 2005 in regards to the social networks, and so they're saying, I'm seeing the degradation of what is a fact happening in society, and it's getting way worse in the States. I have to admit, it's not as bad in Europe or in westernized Europe, I guess, where I can go there and still have those types of conversations. But in 2004, I was a legislative liaison with the ACLU on technical issues. And I found that I was still able to talk with a lot of the Republican staff and their representatives and things of that nature without things becoming highly confrontational, while I don't think I could hold such a role today in our society, because I feel like it's a reflection of our society. When Microsoft did that first little AI bot a while ago and she immediately became a little Nazi, it was like, whoa. And Twitter for a little while became reasonable with the whole thing in the Ukraine, and everybody banned all the Russian internet traffic because it basically eliminated a bunch of these bots. And to me, a lot of that stems from the fact that we haven't solved the identity problem. I think there's a bunch of different ways that we can go about doing that, and that's a lot of the work that I do for that. But one of the things that I see happening on that is I can tell you, and I've been able to tell you for a long time, what you are going to believe is a fact based off of your data, right? I can sit there and say, oh, I look at this and this and this, and so you're going to believe that this is a fact. It's not, but I can still tell you that. And I feel like we're gonna have to be very careful about the legislation in regards to that, because like I find different things, like when I go to Europe, for example, there are very, very strict rules about Nazism, in Germany, where it's like, no, not occurring, not allowed, you do it, the law's coming after you, no. Which is really interesting, because they also have some of the most rigorous individual privacy laws at the same time. So, I did this whole enterprise search thing at PayPal and realized I had accidentally violated German law in the process, because I'd gathered so much data from so many different things. For the developers, not for all employees, but for the developers, I could basically tell you what you were doing all day, which is illegal. So I think that there's going to be a lot of different stuff that comes into play for doing that when you do that, because I think it's a pretty severe issue, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it, other than having to get the identity stuff, having to get institutions in place for doing peer review, fixing peer review itself, because peer review isn't doing so great lately either. I think that AI can actually help fix peer review, because a lot of old data right now is coming up as being fake, because of the fact that it's all being because now the data is having to be open and it's being reviewed, and now people are going up, that's not accurate, your data's bad. So yeah, totally.
And before we continue, I'm just going to put a plug, because I have to, on behalf of all census employees on this call. Our views are our own and do not represent those of the federal government.
Good warning, good warning. And I'm
I've
sorry for
learned
bringing
it's a
that sort
disclosure
of
that we need to
ideological
have.
thing, right? But it's important that we address it. Diamond, would you like to address this discussion?
I think it's such a interesting topic and an interesting issue that the truth has morphed to relativism, where the truth is relative to where you stay. And I hope that at some point we will get back to having one source of truth with the data, given that data still can be manipulated. And that's where the conversation, and I'm sure it could be a year-long lecture on ethics and morals would have to come in. As Sloan mentioned earlier, ethics has to be at the start of it. It has to start with the data too. So I'm hoping that at some point we will have ethical conversations, not just about outputs, but the inputs as well.
Thank you. Luke?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on two facets of this that I think are really interesting. So, and the second's going to be a pivot. So one is that I'd like to point out that, and maybe this is the optimist in me, if you will, when it kind of looking at just the sort of the level of disruption and the level of anxiety and unrest that's really been introduced in recent years, which is that when you look at some of the perhaps the most fundamentally disruptive regulatory introductions like EO 13960, which is on responsible AI, those didn't come out of this administration. They came out of the previous administration. So I think what's really interesting about this is I know tempers can flare in the political world, but what's been really interesting is there has been a continuity within the U.S. government when it comes to putting an emphasis on the importance of introducing responsible AI and ensuring that federal agencies especially are adopting those best practices. So that's like the first thing I would say. Again, that's the optimist to me. And then the second thing I would say is I think there's an element to your concern, which is really important, though, with artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, which is this concept of trust, right? And I was looking at a recent survey, I think that the MITRE Corporation had done, which found, I think it was like 39%, only 39% of adults in the United States trust an artificial intelligence solution. So if you were to tell that adult this was built with AI, how would they feel about it? They don't trust it. And the thing that's really scary for us, I think, from a statistical perspective, is that our data, yes, it must be truthful, but it must be trusted, right? Those two things need to be in lockstep. And even if we have the most rigorous statistical standards, right, to inform the data that we publish, but no one trusts it, what happens? That's a really profound and significant problem. And so I think that this is where the concepts of trustworthy AI, specifically in transparency, come in. I think this is where the Census Bureau, I think, has an opportunity to lead in this space, to be as transparent as possible about the kinds of work that we're doing. I think that, some of the folks on the call had mentioned, and myself included, things like Stat Ventures and TOP. I think, expanding our efforts to engage with the public and to talk about our work and to give the public an opportunity to chime in, to give outside organizations the time, the opportunity to get involved and partner with the Census Bureau is going to be really important, because we have to, in order to readily adopt these solutions, they have to be trusted. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to really move at the pace that we need to, when it comes to, the sort of disruptive pace that, these technologies are being introduced. And so that's the point of trust for me is both really important. And, I don't think anybody has really great answers yet, particularly on operationalizing responsible AI. But it's something that is actively being worked on by a number of folks, both in the U.S. government as well as at all the leading kind of private sector entities as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a reaction to Silona and Luke, maybe both of your presentations, and in particular, something you said, Silona, struck me about kind of the need for measurement and evaluation and fairness. And one, I think in my own work, when we have implemented AI, we've somewhat had an existing toolkit of analyses to look at, thinking about any bias we've introduced in the data product. We also did some, analyses of our own specifically related to the machine learning we were implementing, right? But if you think about something like Chat GPT and different queries you can ask Chat GPT, you probably want really different evaluation strategies and measurement for different queries, right? Like if I say, hey, Chat GPT, write me a program that counts to 10, like I'm going to evaluate that very differently than, hey, Chat GPT, give me a list of interesting speakers for a panel on AI, right? Where I hope that panel is demographically diverse, has interesting different perspectives, et cetera, right? So do you see ways of more generally measuring fairness in AI? And Luke, maybe with the toolkit, that's what made me think of you as well. What kind of generalizations or potential ways to kind of scale that out do you think exist, or do they exist? Do we have to sort of carefully evaluate different applications on a case-by-case basis?
So if you're looking for how I would go about on a global solution, one thing that I think we often forget is culture, right? And the fact that there are different cultures and there are things that are acceptable that are not acceptable in others. It's completely acceptable to tell dead baby jokes with 14-year-old boys. It's not as acceptable to tell that with, you know, a woman who's dealing with something along those lines. You know, and so the contextualization of these things always matter. And that's one reason why, you know, I stress an importance on peer in regards to peer review. And if you don't get the diversity right on that, you're never going to get it right. And if you don't explore the culture where you need to explore the culture, you know, and we kind of ran into this dilemma at the very beginning of search, right? Because with search, you would get a lot of things that were out of context. Like, it's okay for there to be a picture of Silona out there in a bikini. It's not okay for it to find out when you're Googling her to find out when she's coming to speak at your event at work. Right? You know, there's like two different aspects of that. And so when you're sitting there and you're going through a lot of those different aspects, you have to have a certain amount of that embeddedness for it to understand who the people are, where they're coming from, you know, and how that's going to work correctly. You know, I often tell my stepson, you know, I'm not one of your gaming buddies. We don't talk this way to me. But I'm not telling him don't talk to your gaming buddies that way, right? You know, that's the culture. And so we do have to sit there and figure those things out. And I do think that that's one reason why I say identity is a very clear element of that in regards to what is and isn't okay. And how do we go through and define those, I think is a really important element. And you have to be careful that when you're being global, that you might be messing up in other places. You know, the Chevy Nova, right? That they want to sell in Mexico. Nova means no go in Spanish. Maybe, you know, you need to be a little bit more aware of that coming forward. I do think that there is a lot to do in regards to personalization of that so that you can tell those different pieces. But I do worry about a bad feedback loop. Though, you know, my initial thing that I said that we should do with social media is make it so that you can see the branches of people so that I can basically cut off branches. So like all the pickup artists and the secret people can all go on their little private island together and be mean on social media together over there, and that's fine. I think when it comes back to government and some of the stuff that we're actually doing that's very serious in regards to the census and things of that nature, I do think that there are ways of creating standards for handling that. Just like there are, you know, science has been very good about that, about, you know, doing those different parts. Not always lately on the implementation on the peer review, but, you know, the basics are there.
Luke?
Yeah, I think one thing I just wanted to add in reaction to that, Silona, is that you know, the thing that we're grappling with, particularly like what in this AI machine learning governance working group that's recently formed, is the notion that any introduction of governance is going to fundamentally make our ability to adopt these solutions slower, right? And it's not just like, and then when you think about like, you know, and we're not talking about just like an isolated go no go decision on the procurement of a particular solution, right? There's already a lot of baggage that comes into doing technical work in the U.S. government. There's already a lot of baggage that comes with doing, you know really even accessing data in our environment. It's good baggage. There's a reason for that. It's protecting people's data, and that's really, really, really important. In fact, it's the most important thing. We have a legal and moral imperative to do that, right? But then when you add on to that, right, like any form of governance, it's a significant concern of ours that is just going to inhibit our ability to also adapt at a reasonable pace to the level of disruption that's happening when it comes to the kind of advent of these various technologies and what it seems like a weekly basis anymore. So I just wanted to plug that. And so I think the lens that we're taking, at least so far in this working group, is that the emphasis needs to be less on a governing body, like a group of individuals that says yes or no to things, but rather on where are we missing the kind of enablers of this work, and how can those enablers not only enable great work to happen, machine learning work like Christian mentioned, but also to do so in a way that matches our kind of our standard of excellence and meets the requirements set out in the existing executive orders, risk frameworks, et cetera, that the Census Bureau is legally bound to, but also bound to from a policy perspective and just from being good practitioners perspective. So these are really important things, and I think that this is a significant shift in thinking, like from a philosophical perspective, from how we've traditionally approached IT in the U.S. government. I think the way that we've done this before is, especially on the procurement side, is kind of like the same way we buy a couch is the way we kind of think about software acquisition. And these are very different things, particularly because, ironically, the life cycle of a couch is a lot longer than the life cycle of a piece of software, or it should be, right? I think sometimes the software outlasts that, and that's very problematic because at least the couch falls apart, but the software, it doesn't fall apart until it really falls apart, and then you have significant problems. So all this to say that we're just trying to take a slightly different approach, perhaps a significantly different approach to what we mean by the word governance. Because in the U.S. government, when you say governance, it means people, again, authority reviewing things. And when we say governance with this effort, we're trying to match what the private sector means when they say artificial intelligence governance. And that's really about enablement and enablement responsibly.
So to add on to that, when I say governance and when I'm thinking of governance, I come in with my bias. And my bias is that of open source and how we do things from a membership driven perspective, where we can go in and have the cultural aspects taken care of and things of that nature. And we can go in and do a lot of those different aspects. And so that's what I often mean by governance. That's one reason why I caution so much that we need to be discussing standards, because I am terrified of the legislation that's coming up, because I do feel that some of that legislation can be done poorly. I do not want the banking core problem that we still have, where it's required by law to use certain chips, and they're still using those chips. And that's why money transactions actually take 3 to 14 days to go through, is because the batch files have to happen and it's all been regulated. And that seems very problematic in this day and age, but it's not changed still. Right? So you have to be really, really careful about what you legislate. And that's why I like looking at the standards. And I don't mean just like a normal technical standard. I mean, starting off from best practices, going through all of those different pieces, bringing in, there's a great XKCD graphic that I'll have to go find the link to about, there's too many standards. We'll just write one standard that has all the use cases. And now there's it goes from 13 to 14 standards. And I feel like that's what happens a lot of times in standardization, is there's too much proliferation because of the fact that it became too niche in regards to it, or maybe the standard needs to in some way acknowledge the niche, right? And sit there and say, oh, well, this is a standard in regards to this, or this is a standard in regards to that. And that way you can better inform legislation when it comes through. My main problem with the current state of the United States is, how do I get legislation done well? And nowadays, I don't know how to do that correctly. Nonprofits are very limited in regards to how much they can advocate. Corporations have way more domination in regards to that. So a lot of the decisions that we see happening are corporately biased for large corporations who have the money to lobby. And so I worry about that. But I do think that the majority of the time, if there is standards and there are those different pieces, you can push them into the correct direction. So hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Silona. I wanted to bring it back to something that Adrian mentioned earlier, and this is more in the context of Puerto Rico, which is where Puerto Rico is at in this in these elements. And I think sometimes there's a disassociation of like technology and data, and we know that there's not a whole lot of data infrastructure and governance in Puerto Rico across the board. And I don't mean just in government, I mean just in the practice of data science, in industry as well. And at the same time, we hear a lot of chatter about AI and blockchain and like all these technologies. And you talk about IT from like a traditional information technology perspective. And it's really not like the next level of where we're at or where we're going. But I don't hear a lot of the conversation about how data is a foundation to build a solid technology infrastructure. And again, this is not just in government, I'm talking industry as well. So, I think a lot about this concept of like, how do you future proof from an economic development and economic growth perspective for Puerto Rico? Or at least this question in the context of Puerto Rico, how can organizations, and this is from like business to nonprofit to researchers and others, how can organizations like future proof their technology investments in a way, understanding that to remain competitive, they need to have some sort of data foundation, but they don't know that or understand that, nor do they think, hey, I need a data engineer, I need an architect, I need, a data scientist. how do you address this challenge? Like, have you, and this is a collective question to all, is the buzz on technology and AI, but at the same time, there's no foundation on data. Like, how do we start with that problem? Whoever wants to pick that up first.
I mean, I've been speaking a lot, but I'd be happy to jump in maybe very quickly there, which is one thing that I found kind of frustrating when talking about kind of the adoption of AI and emerging tech, especially in the government, is that we're often missing the foundational components of that. So I think Diamond's work is a great example of the work that is so crucial to, you know, like you want to do a machine learning project, for example. It's like, what's your data look like, right? Like we talk so much about bringing in the talent, but it's like, well, what about the ATO that you need to deploy the system, right? You can bring in all these wonderful people, but if you don't have an authority to operate, which for those that aren't familiar is, you know, something we like to avoid as much when deploying IT systems in the U.S. government, but it's something that can take us at least 6 to 12 months to acquire to put any system in production, and oftentimes much longer. If you don't have these things in place, or you don't make efforts to improve them, then your ability, you know, to your point, Lorena, to engage in this work sustainably and change over time is going to be inhibited. And that's where I think we find ourselves today. So simultaneously, especially with the XD team, you know, when we think about like standing up the Emerging Technology Fellowship, we're also, you know, exploring how can we make hiring go faster? How can we make this easier? How can we make this repeatable? When we're engaging technology work, how can we get faster access to data that's housed in different parts of the Census Bureau? What's that look like? How can we get faster access to the infrastructure we need? We just got off of the call today with our chief information or security officer, for example, about Linux subsystems and Windows, and also looking at acquiring the local hardware acquired that's not like the standard Census laptop, so that developers on day one can be as capable as possible to engage in project work. And these are just the things like that are often overlooked in a lot of these conversations, but like when you talk about sustainability and being able to like change over time, you have to get the foundational elements right as well. So some portion of your work has to go back to like the 15-20% that's required to do the work well.
I would like to react to Lorena's point and Luke's as well from the following perspective, drawing this analogy. Just like the pandemic advanced like 10 years, digital transformation, at least from online collaboration, communication, and meetings, I think that people's falling in love with ChatGPT is also helping to break down the barriers to adoption of data engineering. And we just conducted the CIO and IT leadership event here in Puerto Rico a few weeks ago, and Lorena and the US Census had a dramatic, really huge participation in the first day of the event. I am on the board of directors of the Puerto Rico IT Cluster, which is the organization that leads that event. And when I analyzed the responses to the event evaluations and assessment, most people, by far, the topic that they love most this year and that they want to be covered the most next year is AI. So we are finally breaking the barrier. And just like you've been addressing all the time, Diamond and Luke, data is the base. If you don't have good data, you cannot have good AI. And when that company owners and also government secretaries, agency secretaries and whatnot, oh, I want this new toy. Oh yeah, you want that new toy? Then you need to work on the foundation. And I believe that's what's going to happen. Now, I want to close by asking Luke a question in the following. I'm concerned that, at least in Puerto Rico, each one of our government agencies, CIOs, is like a tribal chief, and they have their warriors protecting their budget and their standards and their favorite vendors and all that crap. And I'm wondering if at the federal government, you also have the same thing. And I know that the US Census is leading the way quite a bit in terms of this thinking of open access and providing APIs and access to census data and whatnot in a very safe and responsible manner. But I'm wondering, now that the US is working towards building policy on AI, and this is to address also something that Silona mentioned before, are the federal agencies CIO working as a community of practice to devise a common, or at least to align their different agencies' AI strategy in terms of data structure, APIs, data sharing among agencies, public access, cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the thing, so short answer is I believe so. There's of course always going to be some level of like politicking and kind of territoriality, if you will, among certain actors. But I haven't, like, personally, like with all the work I've been doing in artificial intelligence, machine learning adoption, and trying to facilitate that at the Census Bureau, especially in relationship to other federal agencies, I've actually seen a lot of interest in the work that we're doing and folks trying to pull in the learnings from the Census Bureau. I think, I mean, admittedly, the Census Bureau, I think, has a very just a strong brand when it comes to its kind of long and storied history of being a really valuable provider of data on people, economy, et cetera, in all things United States and United States territories, and even international trade, et cetera. So it certainly helps that it has that reputation. But I think something that's been very interesting, I think, in these conversations that I've been participating in, at least, is like really how, we have alignment and excitement across federal agencies on engaging in more experimental ways to share data, for example, through, again, privacy enhancing technologies and things like that. But the work is still really hard, and how do we mobilize? And I think the thing that's been exciting, and this is where, like, at least exciting for me to see, is that the White House has been playing really an outsized roles, especially recently through the recent executive order, to gain alignment across the federal government on kind of focusing exclusively, at least on some facets, some manageable facets of the problem. And that, for right now, that problem is the talent surge that the Biden administration has been talking about. We've been very excited to be part of that through the Emerging Technology Fellowship at the Census Bureau. Christian's area, of course, and other areas of the Census Bureau are doing tremendously great work in that space, and we're eagerly trying to make it easier to hire folks with data science expertise, machine learning expertise, et cetera. And other federal agencies are doing that too. I think I guess the only other thing I would say about it, though, is that right now, like, there is the excitement is there. There's not the territoriality, but the challenges remain. And I think that especially in like the privacy enhancing technology space, I think there is eagerness, there is excitement to share data, to kind of stand up federated learning networks, for example. But it's just very unknown, and it's slow, and it's hard. And you have to get alignment, not just from the CIOs, but also from your legal team, right? You've got to get your legal team, your data owners, your like everybody in the entire chain really kind of aligned on a singular mission to engage in work that's very different than what was traditionally done. And you have to find a way to kind of scope out these projects that makes all actors comfortable. So the tack that we've taken, at least to date, has been to focus less on the kind of data elements of it and more on the infrastructure. So if we can, for example, pilot some of these things in a way where we're using open data instead of sensitive data, we can at least get folks comfortable with the idea that infrastructure would exist to facilitate things like federated learning across these different agencies, and getting the CIOs on board with that. And then once we can kind of demonstrate what this could be, then we start bringing in the other folks from legal, especially, and say, okay, here's the crazy thing we want to do with confidential data. Here are the protections we have in place to ensure that we uphold our legal and moral imperative to protect that data. Is this possible in your eyes? What do you need to see from us? And so we're trying to like kind of go through this checklist of how do we get from new idea all the way through to production. And it's going to take us a while. And really, this, I think, is true of the adoption of any new technology, but especially there, at the very least, we are making the case. And so far, we've been well received, I think, by many of the CIOs across government in this work.
Yeah, and before we go back to Pedro, since I know you're tracking all the questions in the chat and we want to address those, I want to give time. I think Adrian was about to speak up with the question around technology infrastructure versus data capacity on foundation, and how Puerto Rico may or may not be investing in the right kind of with the right approaches and kind of value system in mind to build data foundations as they think about technology investments.
Thank you. Yes, essentially, I think during the past 5 or 6 years, we've sort of seen that the government started to invest in updating their systems, and that has sort of been accompanied by more publishing of data. But it's still a thing of there's not a data culture, particularly on the government side. Most of the time, they want to keep it in their silos. They want to keep it private, and to be honest, it sort of seems like a fear of publishing this data. Sort of as if I publish this, it's not only that it's sensitive or private data, but it's sort of how would it reflect on those that are managing it, essentially. It's one of the things we've seen that's helped this change is that as the heads of these different departments or agencies have sort of gotten younger over the last couple of years, right? They've started to change the way, as Eliut was mentioning, is the way they value the data, the different toys, right, that they could use. They sort of start telling their employees that it's something that we need now. It's something that we need to publish. It's something that needs to be out there so that people can hold us accountable as well. On the other side, I would say we also have a responsibility as citizens to demand that this data be public. Right. If most people understood how delayed the data that we get, the little amount of data that the government publishes, how delayed it is, right? If economic data is often 2 years behind where we're at, agricultural data is almost 10 years behind. So the last published information with respect to agricultural data is from 2014, right? When someone goes to appraise your house, your property, right, it's appraised to 1954 values. It's almost 75 years since that point. So it's a lot of updating that the government needs to do in several areas. The process has started. Unfortunately, it's going a little bit slower than what most of us would like, but that's sort of where the citizens and the residents, right, we also need to demand that this data be made public as soon as possible. And there are areas where the government is improving. I would say that if the biggest leaps are found when we sort of have been able to show them what they could do if they started collecting that additional data, how that could help them, whether it be identify tax revenues or identify areas where there's waste spending, right? Where money is just going nowhere essentially because simply it wasn't being tracked. So there has been traction, but it's something that's going to take, I think, I wouldn't say generational change, but as more and more young people enter public work, it's starting to accelerate the innovation.
Very well said, Adrian. So before we open this up to our questions from the audience, I just have a curiosity. I would love to hear from Edgar, Diamond, maybe Adrian as well, on the following. So Andrew Ang, he's one of the founders and leaders of Deep Learning University to online academy, where I've learned a lot about how to integrate AI into software engineering projects. And he says that AI is the new electricity. So how do we educate our enablers? How do we educate our decision makers and everyday people to learn and adopt AI? And how can Puerto Rico position itself to be able to catch up in this industry? Because we don't have a lot of talent. A lot of talent has gone from the island. So what do you think is the role of AI in Puerto Rico, and how do you think we can accelerate the adoption and education?
Well, to start, I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of digital literacy. And that's something that we're trying to tackle, right? Mutually, PR Blockchain Trade Association and us at Evolving Space. There's a few others that are really trying to push the boundaries on showing people what's possible. And a lot. I personally, I've met a lot of faculty members that have been afraid to use ChatGPT, for example. Like they deny themselves of relieving the delegating the work to the AI. But once I facilitate an introduction, hey, you should do that. It's an easy task. You need a job description. Oh, that would take you like what, 30 minutes? This can do it in 5 minutes. You really want to spend your 30 minutes on that? No, just making it simple, simple use cases, and gradually, the people I've been talking to, the professors and faculty members have been integrating it into their day to day, and it's a process. But I really want to get it back to the point that was brought earlier, to the foundation, like the data that's being recorded and collected. Really think we should foster a culture of crowdsourcing the data, help people implement tracking plans for the data that they produce, so they can use it in their day-to-day or their personal projects or in their courses. And that's something that personally I haven't seen in my academic preparation. That's something that you have to learn usually by yourself. So yeah, once you understand the data that you're interacting with, the data that you're generating, and then you use that data to apply it to something that you are doing, then you can see that there's benefit, and maybe not to be so much afraid of it.
Very well said. Yeah. Any other comments, Diamond?
Yeah, I actually like to piggyback off of that because I think sometimes the skills gap comes across like the monster in the closet. And a lot of the times it's really focusing on those transferable skills to get people in this space. If you understand the foundations of statistics and math and you understand problem solving, a lot of that is integral to AI. AI sounds like this big scary thing, but at the end of the day, it's understanding how numbers work, understanding how can you best fit this model. And I think when the conversations change to how can we capitalize on the skill set we have versus let's find these external things and build those things up and really like focus on the core possibilities with the skill set and the personnel that we have, I think that we'll be able to address those deficits in not just AI, ML, but cyber and all of these spaces. I think that um, it's making a minor thing major. I think when we focus on having solid teaching, having solid programs that create a pipeline to AI, ML, cyber, or whatever you want to go to, then we'll be able to address these problems. But maybe I'm naive in my thinking, but I don't think it's that difficult. When I went from industrial engineering to data engineering, a lot of my projects that I did was focused on how can I take this same skill set, which is the ability to think and problem solve, which is core to engineering. How can I apply that in this same space? When I did projects that were MI or ML focused, it reminded me of when I was in quality manufacturing and I was doing design of experiments and trying to figure out what's the best way to make this model or this linear regression having the best performance of it. It's similar. It's being able to find those same skill sets and transitioning them into this space so we can meet that need, whether that's in PR or in the US. I think that it's not that big of an issue. I think the focus has to be on training the people that we have and then reaching outside of that.
I just wanted to jump in to like completely agree and echo that. And something that I've, really learned and love seeing coming in from the private sector into the Census Bureau is like everybody at the Census Bureau is already a data scientist. And I tell people this all the time. They're like, no, I'm a mathematical statistician. It's like, no, you're a data scientist. You know exactly the same stuff, right? Like neural networks are like, what is a neural network? You combine up a bunch of logistic regressions, which is stats 101. Logistic regression is something you learn in stats 101, right? So, I think certainly from the US government side, it's not just the Census Bureau, but the other statistical agencies. There are these natural powerhouses of this type of quantitative problem-solving knowledge that you need in statistical numerical expertise that can really help drive some of this stuff forward. So, that's something I hope to see more of, both at our agency and with the other statistical agencies I work with.
Great. All right, so we don't have much time left, so let's go on to our questions. So first up, we have Gilberto Guevara. What are the foreseeable income streams for data when the USG philosophy is open source and free data? Is this counterintuitive with trying to bootstrap the data business?
Okay, since I'm doing a bunch in chat already, I'll come in and say a little bit on that. One, first of all, open source is not a business model, nor is open data. They are tools, techniques, and tactics. Some people like to argue that it's like a marketing tool or a community creation tool or all these other different things. I like to think that it's kind of doing a little bit more of the scientific method, honestly, because of the fact that you get so many different people to work together in regards to doing that. So that would be my biggest thing is don't think of it as a business model. When you go through and you do these different things, there's a lot of other business models that kind of spring up around it. Like Red Hat, not Red Hat currently, but Red Hat as it was, made a lot of money being a service provider and basically being the person who got in trouble if something went wrong for you using open source. They changed their model recently, which I don't understand because they were not losing money. Maybe IBM decided they were losing money and they wanted to milk the cow more. I don't know. We know how bad that is. But, there's a lot of different ones who do well with that. For the whole open data thing, that becomes a whole other thing in regards to the brokerage of data, which you can't even get me started on how offensive I find a bunch of the different politics that end up getting played with that. I do believe that so I started talking about open data in 2004 and everybody thought I was a crazy person because I wanted open data in government. And I did this whole citability thing saying, seriously, we own this data as American citizens, please release it. And so, and then we ended up getting data.gov, but they didn't listen to me. They didn't go in and do the knowledge graphs that I wanted on that. I wanted a whole structure for all of the metadata that was going on there, and none of that was done. Ironically enough, I posted a link earlier for the Internet Archive. They're doing it. I met the young woman who's coming in and she's going in and they're scraping all that data off and storing it on the Internet Archive. And because of the findability issue, she's going in and implementing knowledge graphs just like the ones I had suggested. It's awesome. To find this young lady being able to go and reverse engineer and shove it back in and get what you want out of it. So I would caution against that. But then, at one of my super early codathons that my organization did in 2006, we convinced the MTIA in San Francisco to release all of their transportation data. And the very first version of Nextbus was done at the codathon. And, how much stuff sprung from that, business wise, a lot. And so I do think that there's a lot that's there that we can do. And so just be careful thinking that it's a business model because it isn't. It's a tool. And you have to figure out how you're going to use the tool and what is your actual special sauce that's going to go with that tool. So thank you.
Love that, Silona. Up next, we have Jorge Acevedo. His question is, thinking of improving how Puerto Rico stands in relation to other geographies and seizing the opportunity to appreciate initiatives driven by an equity lens that aim to address geographic, policy, and cultural interdependencies. How do you see these opportunities being used to break some of those points where there are identified problems but no magic bullet solution? There's nothing that's perfect, right? Especially, the very complicated solutions. How can we simplify them? So the question is in the chat if you want to see it. Panelists, what do you think?
I would say in this case, it's sort of taking it on a step-by-step approach, right? It's breaking it down into smaller little problems and seeing how you can solve each and every one before you sort of tackle the big question. So essentially, I would start by looking how each different entity would first start gathering data, then sort of how each entity could start publishing it, and then talk about how you could start integrating all of them and sort of start slowly but surely catching up. I mean, if I'm interpreting the question correctly, to other geographic areas throughout the United States, other states, other municipalities, etc. So sort of break it down, go step by step, and it's as the question says, there's no magic bullet. There's nothing that you can implement and would fix the problem from one day to another, or would make us more competitive in the short term, unfortunately.
All right.
So one thing, quick thing I would add to that is that what's really exciting about these technologies that I, like LLMs and kind of computer vision, et cetera, is that the path to getting to deriving value from them is not linear when you compare them to the path that perhaps like some of the perhaps like what the Census Bureau has traditionally taken. So when you think about like how long has the Census Bureau been tabulating data, right? Like we've been doing this for a really, really, really long time. But to unlock the value of machine learning, you don't have to go down the same path that the Census Bureau did. Like if you have, for example, satellite imagery of Puerto Rico, right? We have the technology. If let's say it's of low quality, we have technologies that can enhance those images through through machine learning, through predictability, et cetera, right? Through computer vision, right? There are opportunities, I think, when you may feel that you are behind in the technology adoption curve. These disruptive technologies actually create an opportunity to radically accelerate your ability to modernize, right? You don't have to go through the paths and the pain that some of the other folks had that were kind of exploring these technologies early. It's like you can benefit from being a late, almost like a mid to late adopter of some of these technologies because they've been tried and tested, and now you can take those learnings and fold them in many ways. That's when you talk about like open innovation in the U.S. government, that's the approach that especially our office has taken, right? Like we're not, for example, with Stat Ventures, with Top, like we really are leaning into the expertise that others have built over many years, if not decades, and pulling them in these short sprints to the Census Bureau to rapidly adopt and learn from. So I would think about that approach when it comes to kind of like IT modernization and how you catch up, because if you think you're extremely behind, you may not be as far behind as you actually are. And so just leaning into these communities of practitioners and trying to learn from really what can these technologies do to kind of accelerate your adoption of them, I think would be really important at this moment.
Awesome. I hope with those techniques we can definitely adopt AI a lot further. Lorena?
So I know we're very close on time. I'm going to drop one question in the chat for Christian to answer because it has to do with supply chain and census. So while you answer that question in the chat, I want to check for time with Eliut. I know we want to respect everybody's time. It's close to 7:30, but I saw that there was somebody raising the hand, I believe Emmanuel Martinez. Perhaps we can close out with that question. Or
giving the opportunity, whatever you want to do first.
Yeah, Emmanuel, you had your hand raised, so feel free to unmute and ask your question, and then we'll close with your question, and I'll give the floor back to Eliut to close us out after that. Emmanuel, we see your hand up. Feel free to unmute and ask your question or comment.
All right. Sure. First of all, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I first of all would like to thank the panel. This has been a really interesting discussion, and especially a very interesting way of understanding technology, AI. I'm not a data scientist. I'm basically from philosophy. I'm a philosophy major from the University of Puerto Rico. My hueso, sangre verde. Now, my question is this term of basically how to incorporate good data and in the way it implements AI, and also in the way that how basically the AI doesn't affect our thought process in the sense that it promotes biases. And so how do we discern from all the diverse perspectives in the way we use data? And one way I like to contextualize this question is the way the algorithms in Facebook's did during the electoral season, where depending on your beliefs, your political stance, and the medias you consume, that data is used in order to promote a type of bias. I don't know if I'm confusing artificial intelligence with algorithms. Again, but my question is basically that: how does data? How do we categorize good data in a way that doesn't promote biases? Because that's a really important thing that we should take into consideration when we're developing this technology into the future.
Yeah, so the quick comment I
And
would
thank you
make
so
on-
much for the answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'll just add a quick comment there, which is in the recent executive order, the Biden administration proposed labeling content that has been produced by generative AI systems. I think this is really important, especially for members of the public, because for those that have been paying attention to, or like, or just enthusiasts and reading about generative AI, one of the most important things, this is true of really any machine learning implementation, is that, your solution is only as good as your training data. And so what ends up happening with a lot of large language models, right, is that they're being trained on a vast amounts of, amount of data, less from, specific, kind of targeted API sources and more from web scraping. So pulling content everywhere on the internet. So, how reliable is content that's anywhere and everywhere on the internet? And that's a really important kind of question that we need to answer for ourselves. And so, there's been some proposals. The Department of Commerce is going to be looking into this as well, that really try to better understand, what does a nutrition label for AI look like, for example, and how important is that, especially for generative AI solutions, which are more geared towards a non-technical user and are more typically sort of like a chatbot kind of interface, where like any member of the public really could engage with these solutions right now on this call today. And so what would it look like, though, if derivative products are made from those and then placed on the internet and treated as fact and treated as as if they were trained on accurate data, if you will, to kind of create those outputs. The important thing to remember with large language models like ChatGPT and BART is that they're not trying to be accurate, they're trying to look accurate. Right? They're trying to appear as though they are correct, right? Because that is what they're designed to do. And so I think that's when you read, when you consume the information kind of produced by these tools, just that's a thing that we need to remember, and it's a thing that's very hard to convey in simple terms. So that's why I think like this labeling conversation is incredibly important.
So I think that's well, first of all, I love the analogy on nutrition label for AI. I mean, it hits a spot on what is needed in terms of anyone out there in the public to be able to at least have some reference to, like, is this good? Is this bad? Is it a good answer or not? But certainly everybody loved your comment about what ChatGPT is trying to do or not do. And I know we're at time, so first of all, I want to say thank you for all the panelists. I know this is after hours and it's a long 2-hour, really deep and complex conversations. Thank you for everybody who joined. And of course, thank you to Dr. Eliut Flores for inviting us to participate in this and let us put this amazing panel together. We hope to continue this conversation moving forward. And of course, Census Bureau is here as a partner and collaborator towards the future. So Eliut, back to you to close us off.
Gracias, Lorena. First, I want to remind all participants that you will receive a notification from the Center for Academic Excellence to fill out the evaluation, and they will analyze your participation. And if you participated for 90% of the time of the whole webinar, you will receive a certificate for it. Second, I want to say that to me, this panel has been very important because first, it shows that there's real people, well-meaning people, smart people behind a lot of what's being done with data management, not only in federal government agencies, but also in data management companies and also graduate students in Puerto Rico. And I just want to posit the following. Even though Puerto Rico may be at a disadvantage because we don't have enough programs available on data science, we have a bigger advantage to make up for the shortfall in talent. And that is that in Puerto Rico, higher education, quality higher education is still accessible. And that cannot be said in most states in the US. So it's so expensive that it's become a luxury to get a university degree. So what we need to do is get university management to get off their you-know-what and actually put forth those programs as fast as they can, because in the program where I teach, we actually have a whole bunch of students coming from the US to study online with us because they can do a master's here for less than $10,000. And in the US, it would cost them $50,000 to $100,000 for the same degree accredited. So if we put our mind to it, we can become the data science central study location for the US and for Latin America. So let's work on that. And I know I have some people here from the Puerto Rico Science and Technology and Research Trust. I'm going to be following up on them to see if we can get the university presidents to get moving. Lastly, I really want to express my appreciation, particularly to Lorena. Lorena and I have been collaborating in a number of things. Right now, I am working in her opportunity project for something I want to do with mapping of knowledge nodes in Puerto Rico. But Lorena has been a real champion, not only to bring the census close to Puerto Rico, but also to help people in Puerto Rico realize all the data they can tackle and use for the betterment of our society, our communities, and the people. And specifically for this panel, it was Lorena who brought all these brilliant minds together to help us tackle all these topics tonight. And this has been the best attended webinar in my series, and it's thanks to you, Lorena. We really appreciate it. Again, Silona, Luke, Christian, Adrian, Edgar, Diamond, thank you so much for your time. Pedro, also for helping and joining us tonight. And thank you again, our speakers, and all of you for attending. Buenas noches.
Good night,
Thank you
all.
so
Buenas
much.
noches.
Buenas noches.
Gracias. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.